Today's question is, what responsibilities do interior designers have? So what responsibilities do we have as interior designers on building sites and on construction sites for our design? So we are, even though you might not realize this, we are responsible for our designs. That is kind of obvious, right? But we are also legally responsible for other aspects of that design. So not only the building codes, so making sure that our designs comply with building codes, so the health and safety of the users, the end users of our buildings, but also things like accessible design, identifying hazards while we're designing. So I think this one is an interesting one because a lot of common sense comes into it when we're designing. And yet a lot of designers don't realize that if you do get that thought, maybe that might not be as a good idea. Let's just put it that way. And then what you do after that actually is really important, because you either have a risk that you have to mitigate or you design that risk out completely. And a lot of the time, designers just think that, oh, don't worry, someone else will deal with that. And we can't move on as designers thinking in that way. Obviously, around the world, we already have regulations that deal with health and safety. So in the UK, we have the HSC. In the USA, you have OSHA, I think it is. So every location will have a government body that deals with health and safety on either not only construction sites, but to do with the construction industry and buildings. So as a professional in the industry, we are part of that team that needs to take responsibility for the things or the part that we play in that building being designed or built. So as the designer, what kind of things do we need to do? Well, we need to reduce the risks of the kind of hazards that we're designing. And then we need to communicate those risks. And I think that is the key thing that most people don't take that extra step to do. So we think about it, and a good designer, most good designers or every good designer will think about it. They'll think, that doesn't feel right. I think a lot of intuition comes into it. You might have a lot of foresight in terms of, okay, well, maybe that railing looks a little bit, well, you have the height of a railing that's required by building regulations, but how that is designed also might play a part. So, for example, we're looking for a property to buy in Sydney, and I was looking at the railings for this one apartment. And the first thing that came to my mind, it was obviously a beautiful protected Art Deco building, but there was the innate fear in me as a mother, just looking at the apartment on the 7th floor that has gaps in the balustrades at this big, and then like a couple of horizontal lines, and then where obviously if you were a child, you could easily just step over or just fall straight through. Like it was. It was an Art Deco building, so it was at least building regulations in regards to protection from falling. So, these are the types of things that we need to consider. We design staircases, right? We design things like the finishes on things. How close is something combustible, so something that can catch fire, next to something that is like a fireplace or a combustible element, or like a fire-producing element. So all of these things, how do we place things? Would you really consider putting something really breakable in an entrance hall that's quite narrow and where everyone comes in and out? I mean, is that common sense? Yes. But at the same time, these kinds of things are the things that we need to think about as designers, because they do have an impact. So always thinking about the impact of our design, thinking about what happens after it gets built, what happens at the design stage, during construction, and then maintenance after. What happens after? So the people who live long term in your buildings have to live with the consequences of your decisions. So, I mean, a lot of this is really common sense. A lot of it is covered by building regulations, but kind of things aren't. Things like obviously unsafe placement of objects. So something really, really heavy needs to go somewhere, and that's okay. But as the designer, you don't obviously have to do the calculations for the weight of that, but you do need to convey the information from the product supplier. So let's just say it's a really heavy mirror or artwork, and that needs to be communicated to the builder or the engineer who is designing the pattress in the ceiling for something like a really heavy light. So it's our job to communicate the information and make sure that people are aware that this is a really heavy object that's going in here, because the builder might just see it as an artwork or just as a big mirror, and it might just not seem obvious that this is going to weigh a really like a lot of or be actually very heavy, and maybe the plaster will come off the wall. So what is it that you're fixing into? These kinds of thoughts when you're actually designing these things. And I think, again, a lot of it is common sense, but it's just our job to take it that little bit further and communicate that information. That's the key thing. So unsafe placements, materials, fire-rated surfaces, these are ones you know. Things like poor lighting. I think this one's an interesting one because this is directly related to us as designers and not always covered by building regulations. And I think things like where you're placing lighting, because obviously we all love a good pendant above a staircase, but if that staircase ceiling is 7 meters up in the air and it requires scaffolding to change that light bulb, how do you communicate that? Is your decision to put in a tungsten light bulb that requires changing every 7 months or something? Or are you going to make a different decision about what you're placing there? So this is our decision as the designer. Obviously, we communicate that, get it signed off by the client, but ultimately it's our design decision. And the impact of that decision means that, well, how will they maintain that? Will there be no light in the staircase because no one can change the light bulb? I mean, it's common sense, and it also seems like a very exaggerated example, but it's the little things that we the little things that we don't ignore that make a big difference, perhaps in someone's safety, so perhaps even in saving someone's life. So poor lighting is an interesting one. And the key one I think that most designers forget is maintenance. How will people maintain the surfaces that you're putting into someone's property? So the design decisions that you've made, how do we maintain that and keep it looking in the way that you want it to look over a longer period? Is it, if you are putting, silk wallpaper in a bathroom, is that maintainable? Like, can we keep that clean? Can the client or the client's cleaner clean that surface if it does get dirty or wet? What happens to that? So there are the practicalities of certain things. Some of it is common sense, but some of it isn't quite obvious. And I think that's where we need to start considering these things. So once we have designed something, we have to then make a decision. Is there a risk? And in that, we have to either mitigate the risk or get rid of it. So you kind of have to do a risk assessment. This is really important now here in the UK because we have the Building Safety Act, and for all types of buildings, we are responsible as designers to communicate all of the kind of information about our designs to everyone involved, including clients. Then obviously in the manuals that we present at the end of the project and throughout the project through to the builder. So mitigating risks, and just mitigating the risks associated with the design. That's it. So identifying potential hazards. So just highlighting those, communicating, making sure that somebody knows what it is that might be a problem. And then obviously implementing, if there is something like a staircase that requires changing light, which light fixtures will need to be changed, or the light fitting will need to be changed at some stage in the building life cycle. So how will that get changed? If it's above a staircase and it is 7 meters up high in the air, what will happen? Does somebody need to actually erect scaffolding to do that? So just communicating is required and why you've chosen that decision to be the best decision in that situation. There's something now that we are required as designers to have the golden thread of information through a project. So keeping that decision-making process if something changes. And this is the key, because a lot of stuff does change on a building site. Once the builder gets on board and says, oh, no, I can't do that, don't know, or can't be done is the famous one. And we all say, yes, you can. But the key thing is when a change is made, you have to document that change now. And that is to protect you, and then also to protect somebody in the future who might come back and say, well, why was this change made? So yeah, communicating to clients, contractors, and keeping records. They are our responsibilities. I think that sums it up. So really just thinking about the consequences of our design. And I just want to finish up with one thing, because obviously I didn't raise it, because obviously PPE on construction sites, I thought that this would be obvious. But I mean, even today, my client actually sent me a TikTok about what happens when an interior designer gets on site, and I love it. I think it's hilarious. But no PPE. It's like not even a hard hat, no boots. Like, I think she went on the building site where she had like flip-flops on. So I was like, common sense again. I think, yes, there is the funny side, but construction sites are dangerous. I think it's your responsibility to be professional, and obviously to take that responsibility just that little bit further. And if you do obviously go on building sites, common sense is wear your PPE. So obviously we do teach this in our mentorship. If you want to have a look at our mentorship options, have a look at our website or the links below.